So recently, I've been thinking a lot about Inside Out and Inside Out 2 and what could happen in that film. Whether they're going to have any sequels beyond the second movie, that sort of thing. And in a recent video, I did some speculating about what emotions we're going to see crop up in the second movie and what potential role they could play in the story and in the franchise in general. And this in turn has gotten me thinking about the potential return of another different character, Bing Bong. Could we ever see Bing Bong return to the world of Inside Out, whether that's in the upcoming film or in the future? Or is he well and truly done and dusted? And so, yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we dive into that completely, we better give a bit of a refresher on the life and character of Bing Bong. Okay, so Bing Bong served as the imaginary friend of Riley Anderson, who's the main character of the movie, or rather the main location of the movie, because everything happens within the mind of Riley pretty much. At least in terms of the emotions, which is what we're talking about here. But yes, Bing Bong, he was her imaginary friend. And for a few years in her early childhood, he was a massive part of her life. They'd go on heaps of wonderful adventures and do heaps of amazing things until Riley outgrew him, stopped playing with him, and largely stopped thinking about him at all. Which in turn resulted in him finding himself cast off into the long-term memory region of Riley's mind, hoping to avoid being permanently forgotten in the memory dump. And that's his status quo until Joy and Sadness arrive from HQ, and he teams up with them to try to get back to the headquarters with the promise that they will make Riley think about him from time to time. And at first, he's so incompetent, it's almost as if he's trying to pull the old Jar Jar Binks fan theory, where back in the day, Star Wars fans thought that character was so incompetent and stupid to the point that it had to be revealed that it was all a hoax and he had to be a villain. And it didn't end up happening with either of these characters, although with Bing Bong, I actually think it would have worked quite well. But yeah, I'm still glad he wasn't a twist villain in the end, because what we got was way more impactful from a narrative and emotional perspective. He has such a humongous arc that's filled with so much emotion, where he's desperately trying to help them in order to get back to Riley, but he keeps making mistakes. He has that really amazing scene where he expresses his grief to Sadness about being forgotten and abandoned, about being outgrown. That's just got to be one of the best written Pixar scenes of all time. Moving on, he gets tossed into the subconscious with Jangles the Clown and has to be saved by the duo, before he and Joy fall into the memory dump, where he sacrifices himself to help Joy escape on his rocket ship, which only has enough power for one person to escape. Doing this to ensure that Riley can be happy again, even if it means that the trade-off is going to be him fading into nothingness, being forgotten forever. It's such a bleak and tragic and yet beautiful ending that shows how much he loves Riley and how much he cares about his friends. And normally, I'd say that it's goodbye for him. He's forgotten, he's dead. How could you possibly even manage to bring him back from non-existence? And honestly, thematically, story-wise, I think it would probably be better if they don't bring him back. That was his Andy driving into the sunset Toy Story 3 moment. It feels like the definitive ending for his character. A farewell to Riley's childhood in Minnesota and the beginning of her new adolescence in San Francisco. Continuing on from that point, I think would feel kind of wrong. Much like how I feel about Toy Story 4, if I'm being honest. It sort of detracts from the ending. And so having Bing Bong make a return, beyond maybe in a flashback or something, I feel like would also sort of retroactively wreck his noble sacrifice ending and make it feel very cheap indeed. But that doesn't mean we can't speculate as to some sort of way for him to return. I've said that I do think it would be a mistake, but there are possible ways that I still think would be narratively satisfying and would make sense in universe. Okay, so we know that as a result of falling into the memory dump, Bing Bong is dead. He's gone. He's been scattered to the wind. Pretty bleak, but there it is. And since him falling into the dump suggests that Riley can't ever remember him, you'd assume that all of his orbs that contained any memories of him in the long-term memory area would fade to grey just like we saw in the movie, or would be disposed of by the neurons who worked there, or maybe even they just straight up disintegrated the moment that he faded away in the memory dump. Who knows? Either way, his death ensures that Joy can't just summon up an old memory of him to be resurrected by reminding Riley of who he was. That would have worked for him when he was stuck in the memory banks. But now, he's been deleted, so we have to think of something else to bring him back. But remember, him being forgotten means that only Riley's forgotten him. Joy still knows who he is, she still remembers him, because if he fully vanished from existence, she wouldn't have been able to tell Sadness that he was gone, and Sadness wouldn't have even thought to ask about him, so they can still recall who he was. And like I said, all of the story only really takes place in Riley's brain. So whilst he was erased in her brain without a trace or hope of restoration, I don't think that's the case outside his body. Let's be real. And if there are drawings of Bing Bong from when she was a little girl, or if there are home videos of her interacting with him that her parents captured, or maybe even her parents would remember him and bring it up to her as a, "Aw, do you remember when you had that imaginary friend Bing Bong sort of deal? I miss those days." And so if they ever choose to bring him back, and mark my words, that's a very big if, after all, Disney and Pixar love killing off key characters for that emotional response from the audience, and I can't really recall any of these dead characters making a massive return outside of like a dream sequence or a vision. But like I said, if they bring him back, having that outside mention of him, or a picture or something, spark him back to life inside her brain would be the way to do it. Although if you want to just kick the audience in the nuts, on the flip side, I think it would be even better to have that moment where you think, "Oh, she's going to remember Bing Bong. She's going to remember Bing Bong. He's going to come back." Only for her to wistfully admit she can't remember him at all. She looks at the picture, she hears the story, and she just can't summon him back. Those memories are gone permanently. It's like when somebody tells you a story about yourself from when you were a little kid, and for the life of you, you just can't remember it at all. To the point that it sounds like your parents or whatever are talking about somebody else's life. Now that would be just some delicious audience heartbreak. But that being said, let's pretend for a moment the decision is made to bring him back to life. Not just reference him and make the audience upset, but bring the character back. When would be the right time? We have the how, but we need that why and when. Okay, so honestly, I think bringing back Bing Bong in a sequel feels very rushed. If you were going to do it, you need the story to breathe. It needs to be the main topic, which means that you likely wouldn't have the character make a return in the first sequel, so not in Inside Out 2, because that's not what this story should be. They need to explore a different direction. They've already introduced the new emotions in the trailer. That's a lot, and that needs the chance to be explored. The return of Bing Bong as well, it doesn't feel like it fits in with the theme of puberty. A Bing Bong return feels like a marquee attraction for a film. So if we see Inside Out turn into the next mega franchise for Pixar, which I kind of think it might, then perhaps we'll see it in like Inside Out 3 or 4. Because the reality is, in much the same way as Toy Story, Inside Out feels like a chronicle of the human experience. Even if the humans actually, ironically, take a backseat in the films, it's still about different phases of your life. Simply looking at it through the lens of your childhood toys or your emotions. Riley leaving her childhood home, starting a new life. We move on now to teenage Riley. She's doing her thing and going through puberty with new emotions and experiences. So, what's the why? What would Bing Bong's story be? What would that film entail? And I'll be honest, I'm not a scriptwriter, or at least not a film scriptwriter. But it would surely need to revolve around childhood nostalgia, from the perspective of maybe a young adult Riley, or even older, who knows? Maybe she's off to college. Maybe she's having kids of her own and they're encountering these sort of things. Maybe she goes on a gap year and heads back to Minnesota, trying to find her place in the adult world, whatever. And she stumbles across Bing Bong in a drawing or whatever, and he sparks to life. And then, not only can you have him interact with her emotions, you can have him interact with Riley for the first time on screen. You can have her remember him, and then maybe he even talks to her. Why not have him talk to her? Christopher Robin style. The Disney Christopher Robin film, that's how it should play out. And I think it would honestly be really, really fun. Does it sound kind of cheesy and hokey? Yes, but I think they could make it work. I'm back on the Pixar hype train. But yeah, beyond that though, there's not really much else to say here. And so with all that being said, that's the end of the video. And I would just like to remind you that these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the potential Bing Bong return? Are you on board? Maybe not? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.